A general, a grieving mother, a gun pressed to her head at her own son's funeral. Have you ever seen a moment so wrong, so un-American, that it shakes you to your core? Lieutenant General Olivia Munro stood in full uniform, decorated for valor, battle-hardened from 3 wars, when a white police officer pulled a weapon on her in front of hundreds of mourners, and not a single officer stepped in. What followed would expose one of the darkest conspiracies inside American institutions, where racism, corruption, and betrayal reached all the way to the Pentagon. This isn't fiction. This is a mother's fight for justice. Before we dive into this unforgettable story of courage, sacrifice, and truth, drop a comment and tell us where you were watching from. And if you believe that honoring our veterans means more than waving a flag, stick around. You won't want to miss what happens next. It was supposed to be a sacred moment. Rows of American flags fluttered gently in the warm Georgia breeze as mourners gathered at Arlington Heights National Cemetery. Bugles waited in silence. Honor guards stood like statues. At the center of it all stood General Olivia Munro, the first black female 4-star general in U.S. Army history, her chest covered in medals, her spine straight despite the unbearable weight of grief. She wasn't there as a general today. She was there as a mother laying to rest her only son, Captain Elijah Munro, who died during a deployment in Syria just weeks before his 32nd birthday. She hadn't cried, not yet, not when she received the folded flag, not when the casket was lowered. Decades of military bearing had taught her how to lock away tears. But as the honor guard approached with Elijah's folded flag, something in her finally broke. That's when it happened. "General Munro, step away from the flag." A voice, loud, forceful, unwelcome, cut through the solemn silence like a bayonet through fabric. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Officer Darren Cole, a white Atlanta police sergeant, shoved past the soldiers, pressing the muzzle of his sidearm against the side of General Munro's head. Blood from a scratch beneath her eye, a scrape likely caused by the sight on his weapon, splattered across her Medal of Honor. "You're under arrest," he barked. "For what?" she asked, stunned. "You tried to grab a weapon." There were no weapons, no sudden moves, just a grieving mother reaching for her son's folded flag. The cameras caught it all, dozens of them. Veterans, civilians, news crews. But no one moved. 20 armed officers stood by, watching. Not one intervened, not one said a word. And yet, in that moment, General Munro whispered just 3 words, softly but with the calm force of someone who had led battalions into war. "Not today, son. Not today, fear. Not today, injustice. Not today, silence." In the moments that followed, a single gunshot rang out, not from her, but from another officer in Cole's unit, fired into the air to escalate panic. The flag dropped into the dirt. Munro was tackled, handcuffed, and dragged away in front of hundreds, her son's casket still open. This wasn't just humiliation, it was a message. But they picked the wrong mother. They picked the wrong soldier. What happened that day sparked a movement that would rock police departments, military offices, and even the U.S. Senate. But before we get to that, tell us where you were watching from today. And if you believe that no parent, let alone a decorated general, should ever be treated this way, tap that like button and let your voice be counted. This story deserves to be heard. Stay with us, because what comes next will make you question everything. The ride home from the jail was silent. General Olivia Munro, still in her soiled dress blues, her wrists raw from steel cuffs, stared out the window as the Atlanta skyline blurred past. She had faced down Taliban commanders, watched friends bleed out in the desert, and stood alone in rooms full of men who doubted her worth. But nothing compared to this moment, being pulled from her son's funeral like a common criminal. She hadn't even been allowed to say goodbye. Waiting at home was Amara, her daughter, a civil rights attorney with her father's calm logic and her mother's fire. Amara had been fighting since the arrest, rallying support online, contacting media, coordinating with veteran organizations. But when Olivia stepped through the door, she didn't see a hero. She saw her mother, and she collapsed into her arms. "I'm so sorry, Mom. They tried to bury more than just Elijah today." Olivia held her close. They failed. Later that evening, alone in Elijah's childhood room, Walls still decorated with photos from JROTC, framed commendations, and a faded Atlanta Falcons pennant, Olivia let herself feel. The dam finally broke. She sobbed into his old hoodie, the one that still smelled faintly of his aftershave and campfire smoke. Then she saw it, a white envelope taped to the inside of his dresser drawer, her name on the front, in his handwriting. Inside was a letter and a USB flash drive. "Mom, if you're reading this, something went wrong." His words were steady, calculated, military-trained, but there was an unmistakable fear between the lines. "There's something happening here in Georgia, especially to Black veterans and active duty soldiers. Harassment, false arrests, strange surveillance. I started asking questions. I think I made someone nervous. If anything happens to me, don't trust the department. Don't trust anyone in uniform. Except you." Olivia's hands trembled as she inserted the flash drive into her laptop. What appeared on screen chilled her blood. Videos, documents, photographs, internal police emails, surveillance footage, audio recordings. It was a detailed investigation, one Elijah had compiled over the last year, into a secretive group embedded within Georgia law enforcement calling themselves the Gatekeepers. They weren't just a racist clique. They were an organized brotherhood, many former military, devoted to what they called preserving American order. To them, Black advancement in the armed forces was a threat. Elijah's research showed that dozens of Black service members, particularly officers, had been targeted by these men, pulled over, framed, sometimes even injured under suspicious circumstances. And one name appeared over and over again in the background: Officer Darren Cole, the same man who had pulled a gun on her. When she showed the evidence to Amara, her daughter's face turned to stone. "He didn't just die in combat," Amara said. "No," Olivia replied. "He was placed there by someone who wanted him gone." The final folder on the drive was labeled simply, Langston, Senator Richard Langston, former police commissioner, decorated veteran, current chairman of the Senate Defense Oversight Committee. Elijah had written a chilling note. He's the one giving the orders. That night, as the city of Atlanta slept, Olivia Monroe stood by her kitchen window, staring into the Georgia night. Somewhere out there, the men who killed her son were watching, waiting, planning their next move. But so was she. What would you do if your child left behind a warning like this? Would you stay silent to protect yourself or speak out, no matter the cost? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in truth, no matter how dangerous it gets, stick with us, because Olivia Monroe's fight is only just beginning. It was just past 6:00 a.m. when Officer Victor Huang knocked on General Monroe's door. He looked younger than Olivia had expected, no more than 30, but his eyes were tired. He wore a plain gray hoodie and jeans, no badge, no uniform. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I worked with your son." Olivia, still in the same t-shirt from the night before, stepped aside to let him in. The house was still, too still. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway, which hadn't ticked since her husband's funeral, felt like it was holding its breath. Victor sat at the kitchen table, twisting his cap in his hands. "Elijah trusted you," Olivia said. He nodded. "He asked me to help document what he was uncovering. I thought he was being paranoid at first. I didn't want to believe it." He slid a second flash drive across the table. "But then I saw what he saw." Olivia opened the files. Audio recordings captured from within squad cars and break rooms. Photos of off-duty police officers at late-night gatherings, many wearing matching rings etched with a small G. Internal memos that had been accidentally deleted from department servers. Files that had no business being in the hands of city cops. Deployment rosters. Military personnel records. Psychological evaluations. "They have access to Army files?" Olivia asked, incredulous. Victor nodded. That's what scared Elijah the most. This wasn't just a racist cop here or there. It was a network. Organized, funded, protected. They called themselves the Gatekeepers, and their goal was to defend American values by keeping people like Elijah in their place. Olivia felt her stomach churn. Victor hesitated before continuing. He thought the unit that Elijah was assigned to in Syria, Alpha Echo 6, was deliberately placed in a compromised zone. And he may have been right. Olivia's jaw clenched. I pulled the mission logs from the Department of Defense website before they were archived. His team was assigned to a valley near Raqqa that hadn't seen any real conflict in months. Then suddenly, 2 days after a request from a Senate liaison, they were moved to an unsecured checkpoint, right before the ambush. He pulled out a printed email chain. Request originated from the office of Senator Richard Langston. For a moment, Olivia said nothing. This wasn't just political corruption. It was a targeted execution, disguised in the fog of war, and someone had counted on a grieving mother not asking questions. They had miscalculated. Amara entered the kitchen holding a mug of coffee with a trembling hand. Her voice was firm. Then we go public. We take it all, every file, every recording, and we put it out there. Victor shook his head. It's not that simple. These people are watching every move. Since Elijah's death, I've had my brakes cut, my apartment broken into, my messages deleted from city servers. Even my badge number was marked as inactive in the system last week. Olivia looked him dead in the eye. So why are you still helping? Victor swallowed hard. Because I've seen what Elijah died for. And I'm not going to let them erase that. Together they made a plan. Victor would keep monitoring internal chatter. Amara would begin quietly building legal grounds for a civil case, maybe even federal charges. Olivia would use what she had left of her reputation and rank to reach out to trusted military contacts. But time wasn't on their side, because someone else knew they were closing in. That evening, as Victor returned to his apartment complex just north of downtown, he felt the hairs on his neck stand up. The parking garage was too quiet. He reached for his pepper spray instinctively. Didn't even get the chance to draw it. A heavy blow landed at the back of his head, and he crumpled without a sound. At 2:13 a.m., Olivia's phone buzzed. Victor Huang, admitted to Grady Memorial Hospital. Multiple fractures, severe concussion, phone and laptop missing. Suspected robbery, but Olivia knew better. So did Amara. He was silenced, Amara whispered, just like they tried to silence Elijah. Olivia looked down at the flash drive still resting in her palm. The weight of it felt heavier now, like it held not just data, but responsibility, memory, truth. She walked into her son's room, knelt by his old desk, and stared at a framed photo of Elijah in uniform, arms around two of his black teammates, all smiles in the desert heat. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Victor Huang lay motionless beneath a blanket, his face bruised and swollen, breathing slow through cracked ribs. A nurse whispered updates, but General Olivia Monroe wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on the man who had risked everything to protect her son's legacy and nearly paid the ultimate price. They were sending a message, said Amara, arms folded tightly across her chest. Not just to Victor, to all of us. Olivia nodded grimly. Then it's time we send one back. Back at home, Olivia did what she'd done 100 times in her military career. She planned an operation. Not on a battlefield, but against a network of men who hid behind badges, sealed courtrooms, and backroom deals. The kind of enemy that didn't wear uniforms, but tailored suits and smug smiles. She opened a secure laptop and called in a favor. One she had never thought she'd need to use. FBI Special Agent Dominic Carter, a no-nonsense civil rights investigator out of D.C., appeared on her screen. General Monroe, he said, voice steady. I've seen the footage from the funeral. We've had our eye on certain actors in Atlanta PD for a while now. What you're dealing with is bigger than your son. You don't say, Olivia replied. I have names, files, a pattern of misconduct going back years. They're targeting black veterans. Carter leaned forward. Can you prove it? She nodded. I don't make claims I can't back up. But within 24 hours, things took a darker turn. Olivia's military email account was frozen. Her bank called to report suspicious attempts to close her personal accounts. And most concerning of all, her security clearance had been flagged for review. This is coordinated, Amara said, pacing their living room. They're not just trying to intimidate you. They're isolating you, cutting off your credibility. A knock at the door stopped them cold. two plainclothes officers stood outside holding a warrant. General Olivia Monroe, one said flatly, "You're under investigation for unauthorized possession of classified information and conspiracy to undermine a federal agency." They cuffed her without reading Miranda rights. No explanation, no chance to call her lawyer. As they drove her away, she caught sight of her neighbors, elderly veterans watching from their porches. Some saluted her as the cruiser passed. One man, in a Vietnam jacket, placed his hand on his heart and shook his head slowly, tears brimming in his eyes. At the Atlanta Metropolitan Detention Center, Olivia was stripped of her medals, denied her phone call, and placed in a cold concrete cell. The lights never dimmed. The temperature was kept just cold enough to bite. Every 15 minutes, a guard knocked on the door, just enough to keep her from sleeping. "This is what they do," said a quiet voice from the next cell over. "Break your spirit before they break your name." Olivia recognized the voice. Teresa Jacobs, former National Guard, serving time for a crime that had always smelled like a setup. "You're not alone in here, General," Teresa continued. "They've tried this before, but they didn't count on you coming through the front door wearing stars." 3 days passed. No access to a lawyer, no word from Amara, no calls returned. Then, on the 4th night, a tray of food arrived with a burner phone tucked discreetly inside. A folded napkin carried just 2 words: "Do not give up." It was Officer Lucinda Jackson, a corrections officer whose brother had once served under Olivia in Fallujah, quiet, loyal, and clearly willing to risk her job for justice. Olivia called Amara. "Mom," Amara's voice broke, "we've been trying to reach you. They blocked everything. But listen, Agent Carter's still with us, and he's mad, real mad." "I still have the flash drives," Olivia whispered. "Tell Carter. Langston's name is on everything." "We're working on it. The veterans are organizing. The footage from the funeral is going viral. Millions of views. The tide's turning." Olivia pressed the phone to her ear, eyes closed. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You raised me to fight smart," Amara replied. "Now it's our turn to get you out." Before dawn, the prison erupted in chaos. News vans gathered outside. Protesters sang "America the Beautiful." Veterans in dress uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder around the perimeter, refusing to move. Some held up signs: "Justice for Monroe," "Truth is patriotic," "You can't cuff honor." Inside, Olivia was told she was being transferred to protective custody. But she knew better. They weren't trying to protect her. They were trying to disappear her. If someone tried to silence you for seeking justice, would you still speak out? Would you risk your freedom, your reputation, even your life to protect the truth? Tell us in the comments if you've ever seen power abused like this, and don't forget to share where you're watching from. Because next time, you'll see what happens when a decorated general turns a system upside down. The cell was barely 8 feet wide. No windows, no privacy, just a thin mattress on cold concrete and a flickering overhead light that buzzed like a dying flamme. General Olivia Monroe sat upright on the edge of her bunk, still in the same undersized gray jumpsuit issued when she was processed. Her wrists were bruised. Her heart, worse. She had buried her son without dignity, been handcuffed in front of his casket, labeled a threat to national security, and now she sat in solitary confinement, surrounded by concrete, under 24-hour surveillance. But they had underestimated her resolve. She'd faced down warlords in Kandahar with less backup than she had now. Because outside these walls, America was watching. 3 nights after her arrest, the protests outside the detention center grew louder. Veterans lined the fences holding American flags upside down, a symbol of national distress. Ministers, rabbis, and military chaplains prayed aloud on the sidewalks. Elderly women carried signs: "She defended us. Who defends her?" And in cities across the country, similar scenes began to unfold. The injustice had struck a nerve. It wasn't just political anymore, it was personal, for every parent, veteran, or patriotic American who had ever been told to stay silent. Inside, Olivia had begun to map out her next move. It started with the people around her. Teresa Jacobs, the National Guard veteran in the next cell, passed her news updates scribbled on scraps of toilet paper. Officer Jackson, the quiet correctional officer with a conscience, brought her real food late at night: along with whispered updates from Amara. "You're trending nationwide," Jackson said one night, her voice trembling. "Retired generals are calling for your release. Gold Star families. Even your old CO is making noise." "What about the gatekeepers?" Olivia asked. Jackson's jaw tightened. "They're nervous. A few of them are inside the system here, but they're staying quiet now. You shook the tree, ma'am." But just as the outside world rallied, the system struck back. At 3:22 a.m., guards entered Olivia's cell without warning. She was dragged into a freezing room under the guise of routine health checks. They photographed her, forced her to strip, ran fingerprint scans 6 times, deliberately smearing the results to justify repeat testing. "You think those stars on your shoulder matter in here?" one guard sneered. "No," Olivia replied calmly, "but they'll matter out there, and I'll remember every name I see and hear." They left her cuffed to a bench for nearly 2 hours. By morning, the bruises were visible. That same afternoon, Amara finally gained court-authorized access to see her mother. When Olivia was led into the visitation booth, she stood a little straighter, refusing to show pain. Amara nearly burst into tears. "You look like hell," Amara said softly. "You should see the other guy," Olivia answered with a half-smile. Amara slid a folder across the glass. "I filed a habeas petition, federal courts looking into due process violations. Agent Carter is compiling an affidavit, and we've found a sympathetic federal judge." "Langston?" Olivia asked. Amara nodded grimly. "He's moving pieces behind the scenes. But we found the thread, and we're pulling." Olivia opened the folder. Inside were photos, military personnel, judges, police officials, connected by red lines and dates, a network of influence charted out like a spider web. "Elijah was right," Olivia whispered. "They've infiltrated every level of enforcement." "And we're going to burn it down," Amara said. "One branch at a time." Later that night in her cell, Olivia began writing. Not notes, not reports, but a letter to her son. "Elijah, they tried to silence you, and now they're trying to silence me. But they don't understand what kind of mother you had, what kind of soldier. You didn't just serve your country, you saw its flaws, and you tried to fix them. And for that, they called you a threat. But the truth has teeth, my boy, and it's about to bite. Love always, Mom." As she folded the note and tucked it under her mattress, the cell door buzzed open. Officer Jackson stepped inside, urgent. "Judge issued a ruling. You're being released pending investigation." Olivia blinked. "Released?" Jackson nodded. "Federal pressure, veteran protests, the footage, the nation's watching." Olivia exhaled deeply, standing tall. They hadn't broken her. They'd only sharpened her resolve. By sunrise, Olivia Monroe walked out the front door of the detention center. She was still in her prison-issued jumpsuit, but her back was straight, her chin held high. Outside, hundreds stood in silence. Then, as if rehearsed, every veteran in uniform snapped into salute. One by one, civilians followed, hands on hearts, tears in their eyes. They weren't just welcoming her back. They were declaring something. "We see you, we stand with you, and this fight is ours too." What would you do if your country turned its back on those who gave everything to protect it? Would you look away, or would you rise with them? Tell us in the comments if you believe in honoring our veterans, not just in words but in actions. And let us know where you're watching from, because in the next chapter, General Olivia Monroe takes the fight to those who thought they were untouchable. Freedom always comes with a cost. For General Olivia Monroe, that cost had been 3 days of humiliation, isolation, and psychological warfare in a concrete cage. But now she was free, at least for the moment, and she had no intention of wasting that moment. Less than 12 hours after her release, Olivia arrived at a safe house 2 hours outside Atlanta, nestled near the calm waters of Lake Lanier. The property belonged to a retired JAG officer, an old friend who'd once stood beside her during a combat tribunal in Mosul. The porch creaked as she stepped onto the deck. Inside, Agent Dominic Carter, Amara, and 3 trusted veterans from Elijah's unit sat around a large oak table covered in documents, laptops, and satellite photos. "You ready to fight back?" Carter asked. Olivia didn't blink. "I didn't come here to fight," she said. "I came here to finish what my son started." They called it Operation Lightfall, named after Elijah's call sign on his final mission. The strategy was simple in theory, dangerous in execution. Expose the gatekeepers from the inside before they could erase what little evidence remained. Amara mapped out 3 objectives. Document every federal-level contact tied to Langston. Secure first-hand testimony from military victims of the gatekeepers. Capture a live admission from a high-ranking member of the network. It was a tall order, but Olivia had faced worse odds. They started with the victims. Over the next week, Amara and Carter conducted over 24 confidential interviews with Black service members who had been harassed, demoted, or falsely charged after returning home from deployment. Most had never spoken up, fearing retaliation, reputational ruin, or worse. One former Air Force captain from Missouri sobbed as he described being pulled over 3 times in 1 week by the same officer and beaten during the last stop. A Navy chaplain from North Carolina showed the team doctored surveillance footage used to justify his resisting arrest charge. A Marine colonel, now retired, revealed he had lost a promotion when anonymous tips questioned his loyalty, just weeks after testifying in support of minority recruitment efforts. Every story shared the same chilling thread. The gatekeepers were real. And they were everywhere. But they needed more than victims. They needed proof, direct and irrefutable. That's when Carter brought in the tech. He placed a small black case on the table. "This," he said, "is the key to ending them." Inside was a custom ultra-thin voice recorder, disguised as a lapel pin. It had been used in counterterrorism ops in Yemen. Now it would be used on American soil. Olivia's mission: get Chief Darren Cole to admit the truth. About Elijah, about Langston, about the gatekeepers. "You're the only one he'll meet with," Carter said. "He thinks he broke you. That's his mistake." 3 days later, Olivia walked into the Atlanta Police Department headquarters wearing a sharp navy blazer and her Army service uniform pants. No medals, no pomp, just purpose. Chief Cole's office was wood-paneled and slick. Photos of him shaking hands with city officials and smiling at police graduations. But as Olivia stepped in, the air turned cold. He gave her a tight smile. "General, you look well." "I'm not here for small talk," she said. "You tried to ruin my name, Cole, at my son's funeral." He shrugged. Things got out of hand. Emotion runs high when people don't know their place. There it was, the arrogance. She stayed calm, let him talk. Over the next 20 minutes, he boasted about maintaining order, about knowing when to keep the ranks clean, and finally about how sometimes deployment orders get moved around, especially when certain senators call. He laughed. "Shame about Elijah. Good soldier, bad timing." Olivia didn't flinch, but the recorder in her lapel was capturing everything. Back at the safe house, Carter and Amara listened to the recording with grim satisfaction. "Got him," Carter whispered. Within 48 hours, federal warrants were issued. The FBI, and military justice officers conducted simultaneous raids on properties connected to the gatekeepers across Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. Computers were seized, hidden bank accounts traced, internal messages surfaced showing Langston's direct coordination with Chief Cole and several other law enforcement leaders. The morning after the raids, Senator Langston gave a press conference, trying to spin the narrative. This is a political witch hunt against a lifetime servant of the people. But it was too late. The networks had aired Cole's recorded confession. Across America, headlines flashed the same words. General Monroe's fight for justice exposes national law enforcement conspiracy. That night, Olivia stood outside the safe house, watching the stars. Elijah used to love staring up at the night sky, counting satellites. "You said you'd protect this country," she whispered. "And you did. You still are." Behind her, the team celebrated a victory, but Olivia knew the battle wasn't over. Not yet. Have you ever watched the truth claw its way out of the dark, one voice at a time? Would you fight for justice, even if it meant taking on the system itself? Comment below where you're watching from, and if you've ever stood up when it wasn't safe to do so. Because in Chapter 7, justice knocks on the doors of the powerful, and not everyone will answer willingly. The sun rose over Washington, D.C. with eerie calm. Inside the marble halls of Capitol Hill, cameras were being mounted, microphones checked and chairs arranged with military precision. The hearing room, normally half empty during oversight briefings, was already at capacity. Reporters, veterans, political aides, and citizens packed in shoulder to shoulder. At the center of it all sat General Olivia Munro. She wore her dress uniform this time, not for ceremony but for symbolism. The stars on her shoulders gleamed. Her Medal of Honor, restored after being ripped off during her wrongful arrest, sat proudly above her heart. This was no longer about her son. It was about every veteran who had ever returned home and been treated like a stranger in the country they defended. The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Institutional Discrimination opened the hearing with a somber tone. Today, the chairman began, we hear testimony regarding systemic abuse and corruption involving law enforcement and federal oversight, brought to light by the experience and courage of General Olivia Munro. A hush fell over the room. Olivia leaned forward. My name is General Olivia Munro. I've served this country for 33 years. I've led soldiers into combat, comforted the dying, and stood before grieving parents as they asked why their children never came home. I never imagined I would become one of them. She paused. Her voice never shook. My son, Captain Elijah Munro, died serving this country in Syria. We were told it was enemy fire. What we weren't told was that his deployment orders had been deliberately altered, manipulated, by men within our own government. Gasps rippled through the chamber. She continued. Elijah was investigating a domestic conspiracy, what he called the gatekeepers, a network of officers, judges, and politicians targeting Black veterans and military personnel. He gathered evidence. He sounded the alarm, and for that, they silenced him. She locked eyes with Senator Richard Langston, seated at the far end of the chamber, flanked by lawyers. They thought they could silence me too. Then came the evidence. Audio recordings, testimonies, deployment logs with redacted names suddenly unsealed. Elijah's flash drive, now admitted into the official congressional record. The most damning piece? A recording of Chief Darren Cole caught bragging about Senator Langston's role in reassigning Elijah to an exposed checkpoint. Maxwell made the call, Cole said in the recording, got him shipped out real quick. Problem solved. Langston's face went pale. He leaned over to whisper to his counsel, but it was too late. His name was already printed on the warrant sitting in Agent Carter's briefcase in the back row. By midday, the committee had seen enough. Langston stood up, attempting to leave quietly, until 3 federal marshals intercepted him at the exit. Senator Richard Langston, one read, you are under arrest for conspiracy, abuse of federal power, obstruction of justice, and negligent homicide in the death of Captain Elijah Munro. The room erupted. Some gasped, others stood, but the veterans in uniform, they saluted. Because in our final chapter, we'll witness the rebirth of honor and the legacy Elijah Munro leaves behind. That evening, as news of the arrest broke, candlelight vigils appeared in towns across America. Veterans and civilians alike lit flames in memory of Elijah, and for every soldier who came home to a different kind of battlefield. The Munro family's courage had become a national symbol. Headlines blared, Justice for Captain Munro, how one mother exposed a national scandal. Later that week, Olivia returned to Arlington Heights National Cemetery. This time, there were no guns, no arrests, no chaos, just a folded flag in her hands and a nation at her back. She knelt at her son's grave. Elijah, she whispered, they tried to erase you, but now the world knows your name. A soft breeze rustled the nearby flags, and in that moment, it felt, for the first time in a long time, like the country she loved had finally started to live up to the promise her family had fought for. Have you ever seen a system built to protect, turn against those who served it? Would you have the strength to fight back when the cost was everything you held dear? Tell us in the comments if you believe justice should reach every rank, every badge, every seat in power. And let us know where you're watching from. 1 year later, the sky above Arlington Heights National Cemetery was cloudless, silent but full of reverence. Today was not a funeral. Today was a promise kept. A new monument now stood at the far end of the military burial grounds, a smooth block of white granite engraved with the words, Captain Elijah Munro. He served with honor. He died for truth. His voice still speaks. General Olivia Monroe stood before it, her uniform immaculate, her medals polished, her back as straight as the flag flying behind her. To her left stood Amara, now lead counsel for a national legal foundation defending veterans' rights. To her right, Officer Victor Huang, promoted to lead Georgia's newly established Law Enforcement Integrity Unit. Across the lawn, veterans from every war, every branch, and every background gathered, holding flags, hands over hearts, some weeping quietly. In the front row sat men and women once silenced by fear. Today, they stood tall because Elijah had dared to speak up. The memorial service was short. Olivia spoke last. Elijah once told me that being a good soldier meant telling the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. He lived those words, and he died because of them. She paused, looking out across the crowd. But now, because of him, we've changed laws, we've exposed laws, and we've reminded this nation that true patriotism doesn't mean blind loyalty. It means demanding that our country live up to its highest ideals for all its people. She placed her hand gently on the granite. You're not just my son anymore, Elijah. You're America's. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, candles were lit. A folded flag rested at the base of the monument. This one not buried, but displayed for all to see. And in homes across the country, veterans sat a little taller. Parents held their children tighter. And citizens, young and old, were reminded that justice, while often delayed, is never truly denied if we refuse to give up. The lesson Elijah Monroe left us is simple, but eternal. Silence protects the powerful. Courage protects everyone else. If you believe we owe our veterans not just gratitude, but justice, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember what honor really means. Like and subscribe for more stories that speak truth with heart and shine light in the darkest corners. Thank you for being part of this journey. Justice remembers, and so do we.